Hey, welcome everybody to the Resilient Living Podcast. I'm here today with my co-host Jared Wilson and Kerry Brown, who's going to talk to us about Silvopasture and what that is and how that can benefit you. But first, as people are kind of rolling in here, we're going to actually have Jared talk about a product that he's brought in that he really likes. I actually like it a lot too. So go for it, Jared.
All righty. So one of the things that I have started down the rabbit hole is communications. And so one of the products that I have in the shop is this Baofeng UV32. Now, most of you probably are familiar with the UV5R because that was like the quintessential, ham radio forever. They stepped it up. They had the UV17, the UV17 Plus. They had all these iterations, and they introduced this one. One of the best things that I love about this is it has the ability to enable GPS location. So you can ping out your location if you desire. You can disable it also to your friends. So if your buddies have got the UV32s also, they can get your location. So if you had an issue, you key up a whole bunch of times, they know that there's something going on. It's just one of those other forms of communication that's great. And then having the ability to give your location is just top notch. And for a pair of these for $100, you really can't get much better than that. So Baofeng UV32, 10 watts transmits. They're great devices. So with that, shall we introduce our new friend?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Welcome, Kerry. Thanks for being on the podcast with us today.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me out.
Yeah, and Kerry had a bit of a drive to get here, so we're grateful for that. So today we're talking about Silvopasture. Can you give us like a definition of what it is, what it looks like? Because most people probably haven't even heard of this and have no idea what we're talking about at this point.
Yeah, so your average homesteader, hobby farmer may not even have heard the term. Silvopasture is just combining trees with your pasture and is generally considered as part of your grazing operation. So that can mean perhaps some nut producing trees, let's say maybe a black walnut that gives you a harvest of nuts. It gives you potentially a timber harvest on down the line. Also provides shade for your animals. And so Silvopasture is kind of a broad term for a lot of systems that could be implemented.
Okay. So it's like a stacked system where you're not just growing animals, but you're also growing trees as well.
Exactly.
Okay. What would be an example of maybe some of the different types of trees that you would have in this, and why would you choose the different types of trees?
So for example, let's stick with like the timber example. When we think of our pastures, we tend to think of these broad acre open, lots of wind moving through, hopefully a variety of grasses and forages and whatnot. And when you put animals, I'm going to use sheep as an example since that's what I run. If you put animals into that, all these animals are ultimately they're going to need shade. And so if you only have a few sparse trees here and there, cedars are what you will commonly see around here, you wind up with a bunch of animals under one tree. You get a lot of compaction. The ground goes bare. It can't grow any vegetation. And so this is not an ideal system, especially from the regenerative perspective. Let's say instead of a single cedar, you plant rows of we'll go with maybe black walnut and black locust, because you can mix and match here. This does not have to be a one and done single species kind of situation. You can shade those animals, and you are spreading their impact over a wider area. That is always desirable. You have your opportunity to collect the nuts Walnuts are also anti-parasitic, so you could also make medicine from those. And over time, depending on how densely you have planted these trees, perhaps, every third tree or so is harvested for timber. So that's one example of how this system can work, but this can be done with a mix of fruit bearing trees and nut bearing trees that perhaps shade your animals. And then later in the season, when your mast and your fruit is coming ripe, you go in and you collect whatever you want to collect for sale or for your own personal use. And maybe you have some pigs at this point, and then your pigs can run cleanup under all those trees. So you can get really creative with how to put these systems together.
Okay. Well, and you can also put in things like fodder trees, right? Could you explain kind of what a fodder tree is?
Yeah. So a fodder tree is grown for a more exclusive purpose of being another source of feed to your livestock. And that could be as simple as rabbits. This doesn't necessarily have to apply to ruminants or large animals. So even if you're running some rabbits, maybe some laying hens, quail, things like that, popular fodder trees tend to be species like hybrid poplar, various willows. Hybrid willow is one of the fastest growing, different kinds of elm. White mulberry is a very popular one. That's kind of my favorite. And so generally when you're doing fodder trees is you are not necessarily grazing the animals in that exact same space of those trees, or you are at least protecting those trees in some way. Because we want these trees to get a little bit of height early on. And then it's called coppicing. So we cut them low to the ground. And if you've ever, most of us have cut a tree at some point and we think we've gotten rid of the tree. Unless it's a conifer, no, that tree sprouts back from the stump. And then suddenly you have, 6 branches coming up and you cut it again and then you have 12. And so when you want to do this on purpose, you are creating all of this leaf mass. That leaf mass is what we're calling the fodder, can be fed to your animals fresh, can also be preserved via silage. It can just be put up and dried. And that is an off-season feed when your other forms of feed are dormant, when the grasses are dormant in the wintertime. The old timers called it tree hay.
Mm-hmm.
So it is, if we're talking about getting resilient, having other on-site forms of feed production is pretty important. So my preference is to do the fodder trees in an area that is not grazed. I have them they're planted into a micro swale. And over time, as they reach appropriate size, I coppice them. And this plot I've developed is still young enough that I'm doing more to propagate from that than feeding at this time. Probably in another year or two, then I'll have enough matter to store up, probably for my rabbits at this stage. But eventually, yes, I can get to a point where I can store dried leaves, and you can just leave them on the branch and, give those to the sheep in addition to hay.
Yep. We've got some pet rabbits. We don't eat them. My girls wouldn't allow that. But one of the things they've loved, the rabbits has just devoured, is dried mulberry leaves.
Mm-hmm.
It's like crack to them. So yeah, being able to save mulberry leaves or willow leaves or whatever, and willow shoots, they seem to like those a lot too.
Yeah, they'll eat them when they're young. I've given like the top maybe 1 foot of the willow growth, the freshest growth, to my rabbits, and they chow the whole thing down. When we're talking about fodder trees, we want to try to identify trees that have a higher protein content. So those ones that I listed tend to be greater. I think somewhere around maybe 14 to 18% protein on a lot of those.
Now, is that wet or dry protein?
That's a good question.
Okay.
Not 100% sure.
I know with a lot of the mulberry, it's like 22% dry for the right types. So the types that were traditionally used for silk and silkworms and things. But I know that can vary quite a bit as well.
Yeah. I always kind of just take an average. I tend to let the animal and the performance of the animal tell me, see like how fast do they eat it? How much do they need to eat? Are they leaving any behind? Are they devouring it right away? how's their body condition, how's their weight look, and rabbits are a good way of judging that too, because a little bit of weight gain or loss in a rabbit can be easily, you can determine that very easily.
Yeah, interesting. So I mean, we're talking about what in Holmgren's principles is like observe and interact. I don't think we've covered that one yet in our series, but it's a really cool idea of where you can take, you can have all the book knowledge you want on how much protein is in a given feed, or all the macronutrients and micronutrients, but when you start feeding it to your animals and you see what they like, you see how it fattens them or doesn't, there's a lot to be learned from that.
Yeah. I mean, especially in the wintertime, do they seem like they're staying warm enough? Are they staying on top of their hay, or are they burrowing down into their hay? Are they kind of out looking around when it's windy, or are they getting in under, the hay that's in their cage, especially when they're up off the ground like that? So yeah, just kind of understanding their behavior will really inform you on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Being a keen observer is so important. Somebody who is traditionally raised, cattle or other ruminants on pasture, I think when you talk about silvopasture, the objections that I hear come up are twofold. One is, if you're putting trees in, aren't you going to lose all your sun exposure to your grass? And two, you kind of already covered this one, but is that when you put a tree in, then all the animals are going to flock, and it's going to ruin the soil underneath, and it's going to erode, and it's going to cause problems. So can you talk about those two things a little bit?
Yeah. And another one, since, farming has become so mechanized, nobody wants to drive a tractor around trees. So that's one reason you get a lot of pushback on it. So when, the compaction issue, that can be dealt with by, just simply adding more trees. So you want to be not overly dense. And this is where, again, where your observe and interact really going to come into this. So I try to go for trees that are going to have, yes, they're going to have a canopy, but they are positioned in such a way that there's still going to be plenty of sunlight getting down to the ground. So we're not trying to turn the pasture into the forest.
Right.
And this can be, one of those things you really have to kind of plan this stuff out. You got to really think about how the sun moves around your property in all seasons. So, and one thing that a lot of people, none of us really want to cut a tree down in most cases, but a lot of systems actually start you planting pretty densely. We saw this out at Caney Fork Farms. They start planting things very densely, and then they kind of see how the trees respond, how well they grow. And they go back, and like every other tree or every third or fourth tree actually gets cut, or at least coppiced. So it's still alive and it's still putting out leafy matter, but we're allowing more sunlight back onto the ground. Yeah. People are afraid, it's going to kill the grass, just like people think that, the leaves from their maple tree is going to, kill the sod in their suburban yard or whatever. Not necessarily. So again, it's observing where that tree needs to go, how the sunlight's going to reach it, and getting that kind of play between densely enough to matter, but not so dense that you are inadvertently turning your field into a forest.
Sure. Well, and one of the things I've noticed as well is, again, with the observe and interact, depending on where you are in the United States, you might actually need a little bit of shade to get a better quality or type of grass to grow.
Yes.
And so you might notice that somewhere where you've got a tree where half of the day it's shaded because the sun's passing over it, you get a very different type of grass. Maybe it grows faster with less sun. And now you're also stacking in space as well, because you're vertically growing. So you're capturing all of the sun, but in a way that's totally usable. So the amount of lost growth underneath, if you're getting your densities proper, you should be having a net gain overall because of that.
Yeah. And it's also good to understand when you're starting to think about adding trees to your pasture, is also understand what kind of grasses and other, we call them weeds, but forbs, what other species are down there covering the ground. And, are you heavier on cool season species that then go dormant as soon as we get hot? And maybe the fescue or the Johnson grass are the only things, maybe the crabgrass, that's what becomes dominant. But then you also see a lot of exposed soil because all those cool weather things have died back. So yeah, you really do have to kind of look at that whole profile of what's going on the ground. So, and one of the benefits as well into adding trees into that system is you have created a variety of root reach and root depths, which means you are going to hold water in your soil better. Water filtering down through a tree's canopy is slowing down. It's easing into the soil instead of running off. Most of us in Tennessee are dealing with some kind of slope on our land. We want to slow that water down. Trees can be a part of that just as much as swales and berms and all those other earthwork systems. So yeah, slow that water down, and let that that kind of microclimate of the tree inform what's able to grow underneath it. Now, one example I could think of, and this also was assisted by having the positive impact of the sheep, but we had this one particular cedar tree, and underneath the bulk of the canopy of it was just always bare, and it had a lot of dead in it. So I got him with a pole saw and just kind of got out some dead branches, and just, even though it didn't really open up the canopy a lot, and a few passes of the sheep mingling under it, doing like they do, dropping the manure, all that kind of stuff. Within, I observed this bare ground in August, and when the weather cooled down by October, November, I started seeing cool season stuff growing underneath the full on canopy of the cedar tree, which gets, at this particular angle, it gets some early day sun, shaded most of midday, and then it gets late day sun on the southwestern portion. And these cool season species showed up from that positive impact. So yeah, don't count out conifers as part of that system. They can definitely work.
Very cool. Well, I'm wondering if you can tease apart for us a little bit, and this might be getting into the minutia, but the difference between coppicing and pollarding, because they both have a place in this system.
Mm-hmm.
How would you explain each, and what would be the purpose for them?
So coppicing, we're cutting close to the ground. I kind of tend to gauge anywhere from about a foot to maybe 2 feet, 2.5 feet from the ground. And that's going to stimulate more regrowth from the stump. You want to do that if you are wanting to collect a lot of matter from like a fodder tree easily and not having to really reach overhead. I don't like to work overhead. I would personally rather bend down a little bit. So this could be a preferential thing too. So you'll get a lot of regrowth that's easy to harvest and easy to take cuttings and turn into more trees. If you're going to pollard, we're usually just operating higher. So I kind of tend to think of it as above chest height, and same thing. Usually we're not cutting like the trunk. We're cutting branches pretty close to the trunk, and then we're encouraging all this new growth. Peaches are a good one, especially like your Asian, or not peaches, but pears. Asian pears are a really good example of being able to get that regrowth. And this can be done to, like, if you don't want to lose a tree, you don't want to take a tree out, but maybe you've got a tree that is casting a lot of shade and you would like to get more sunlight down on the ground, but like I said, you don't want to lose the tree. Some kind of pollarding is probably going to be the way to go for that.
Okay. Yeah, I know in Europe and other places, but Europe strongly used to use pollarding as a mechanism to keep the trees alive. And my understanding is that it actually kind of resets the age of the tree.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
That's the way I've seen it. I've done it with tulip poplars. One that was on a customer's property that we really didn't want to lose, but it was really starting to overtake a pollinator garden that needed a lot of sun. So we did a fairly high, like I was doing this with a pole saw. So it was a pretty high poller, well above my head. But we were able to keep like a really healthy structure of the tree. We had a main trunk, which was nice. And so it was still, we didn't have to take the whole tree out, but we were able to get that sunlight back. A lot of people don't like the way they look. Like when you see something pollarded, they think you've killed it or you've topped it or something like that. That's not necessarily the case. And you're right. It does seem to, the tree just kind of reverts back. It's kind of like, okay, I'm sort of reset here, put out fresh growth. You can help a tree that has maybe gotten a little lopsided due to storm damage or something like that, wind damage. So, if you can understand how the tree is going to respond, which sometimes that's the hard part. So this is where a lot of research is useful. But if you can understand how the tree is going to respond to that pollarding, that pruning, you can keep a tree that a lot of people might just be like, oh, I just got to cut this thing down.
Yeah. There's a really interesting story.
I'm assuming that there are certain trees that would benefit more and some trees that would benefit less from pollarding. Is that correct?
Yeah. Quicker growing trees. So trees that would kind of be like early successors in a forest do better. We don't usually do this with more mature hardwoods, like very, very mature trees, oaks and maples. I'm talking about trees with a very large trunk. Might not work. That might actually kill the tree. But if we're talking about something with maybe up to a 10-inch trunk or so, I would play around with pollarding and it would probably turn out just fine.
Yeah, because it was funny because on the West Coast, I never saw any trees being pollarded. Is that the correct pollarded? But then I moved out here and I see it like everywhere, and it was very odd for me, coming in and seeing all of these trees. I'm like, why are they killing all these? So I'm guilty of that myself.
Yeah, you would probably see it maybe on some of the large orchards out that way. I don't know if they do this with almonds or not. I don't know a whole lot about almonds, but I imagine because you think about the root stock of that tree and how well established that root stock is, but it's gotten so big and you perhaps just need to reduce it down. And again, you're kind of turning back the clock. You're kind of resetting that tree's brain, as it were.
There was a story from, I don't know how it was, 10, 20 years ago, but there was a pear tree. I think it was in Virginia. It was one of the founding fathers' favorite pears. It was actually their tree. So a couple hundred years old. And it was highly protected, but it was starting to die off. And so they had, like a fence around it and things. And somebody came in, and it was always assumed that it was vandalism, came in and chopped it down, like cut it down, but they cut it down in a way that it was careful. And now the tree is actually like way healthier than it ever was. So, and I've got a friend who has a very old homestead. I think one of the oldest in the, Trousdale, Hartsville, Tennessee area. And she had a couple of very old pear trees that were dilapidated. They're kind of hanging. They were just diseased. And so I pollarded them, and we've gotten amazing fruit off of them for the last 4 years.
Yeah.
So, for the right tree, but we also tried that with an apple tree that was diseased on the property, and the apple trees don't like that very much.
Yeah. Certain species definitely respond better. I always feel like it's worth trying. If you're pretty sure you're going to lose the tree anyhow, try it. And if you're dealing with something that's diseased, just like, don't spread those branches around, burn them, don't take them onto another property, try to dispose of them right then and there. But, it's a useful technique, and I think a little bit overlooked.
So there's a couple different ways of establishing, roughly speaking, establishing silvopasture. One in my mind would be taking something that's already a forest and clearing it out and leaving only the trees you want. The other would be taking something that's already cleared and is a pasture and adding trees. Do you want to speak to clearing it out? And is that agroforestry? Is that silvopasture? What are the specifics there? So
we ended up calling it the reduction of a forest. We ended up calling that subtractive silvopasture. And so a lady who is a mentor to me in the kind of agroforestry and silvopasture stuff, Wynn Miller, back about a year ago now. I guess it was about February of last year. I had her out in a small group of people to the farm. She's been in the agroforestry space for a long, long time. Very, very knowledgeable on all this. And I had a, I don't know, 500 or 600 foot long section of wood line that abuts a pasture. And it's not by any means what I would call, you know, a forest, but it was a very dense wood line that was really full of things like bush honeysuckle, privet, a little bit of calorie pear, just kind of a bunch of invasive stuff that we are working on reducing over time. But we also had a bunch of willow oak, post oak. There's some sassafras. There's some black cherry in there. A couple of young pines, a couple of Virginia pines, a white pine. And so we ended up going in and just cutting everything that we could find that was invasive. Because I'm talking about privet that was, you know, 4 inches around. And we ended up cutting all that material about knee height. And I did that because I knew it was going to resprout. And I have the intention, like over time, I'm actually getting this stuff pulled out by the roots. But for now, I said, let's get this stuff cut down so we can interrupt the berry cycle, which is one of the main ways this stuff propagates itself. Also because I knew the sheep would be coming through there, and they love privet and they love bush honeysuckle and all that. And so I knew they would be nipping off that new growth. And they go through this section about 4 times in a year, 4 to 5 times in a year. And so that's what we did. We just went in and we just cut stuff at knee height. I cut it high so I could see it. If I cut, you know, little tiny stumps, I'm tripping all over everything when I'm running fence through there. And that has worked really well. And of course, what it did is it opened up a lot of the forest floor, and I started seeing cool stuff coming in. So little ferns started coming in, and this was basically just leaf litter. There wasn't a lot going on the forest floor. Our little Christmas ferns that come in. There's a kind of a native, I'm going to blank on it right now, but it's a beautiful little native wildflower. And it's just looks like a plantain leaf on the top, but when you turn the leaf over, it's kind of an orchid. It is like fuchsia, the underside leaf, absolutely beautiful native wildflower. So yeah, so getting just a little more of that sunlight down onto the forest floor made a huge difference. So that's subtractive, and you can do that if you have what we tend to call like brushy or messy areas. Subtractive silvopasture is a great idea if you're wanting to run, you know, ruminants, you know, even cattle, you know, pigs, any of that. You can work with that. And let's just say you've just got your big open field though. Just like kind of like driving around this in the state, you see a lot of large open fields. I would start with number one, understanding how the wind and the water is already moving across your property. Know your contour lines, and, you know, decide what you want to do. You know, what animal you're growing out, what kind of trees make sense, and start planting those on the contour line. And what's nice about that is if you're still running machinery out there, generally we're driving with contour lines anyhow. So you can still go around, what are probably you're starting out as little bare root, you know, 2 foot tall trees. If you're going to be putting trees into actively grazed pasture and your animals are going to be in there with those trees, you must protect them. Mm-hmm. You must. There is no way around that.
Ask about that.
They will chew them down. Or if they're a little bit larger and you've got a donkey like mine who loves to rub on stuff, they may rub them so hard that they uproot them. So there are a variety of protection systems. There are a bunch. The system that I have learned from Win Miller involves the opaque tree tubes that surround the tree. There is a very tall, probably 6 foot tall fiberglass stake that you put in first. Tree tube goes over the tree. You attach it to the tube. For some, that is enough. Assuming like that will work in my case, like that would work for sheep. Cows want to rub on stuff, so that probably won't work for a cow. So what she ended up engineering, because she was the one who played around this for a long, long time to come up with this system, she wraps the tube in electrified poly wire and then has a topper wire that is tied into the hot wire. And so if that cow goes to boop that nose, that's not so fun. And that those systems are getting more and more affordable. So you're looking at maybe, I don't know, maybe about $15, I think, per tree. And that's the thing. You can do this, you can go out there and you can put 20 trees. You don't have to do hundreds. But use your contour lines. Consider what those trees may be used for in the future. If you want to do hickories and have hickory bark syrup, if you want to do a blend of mash trees, you can do that. Mulberries are one of my favorites.
I gotta stop you for a minute because us three nerds know what you're talking about when you say contour lines. But could you explain contour lines a little bit, and not only what they are, but like how you can maybe just basics on how you can find them?
Well, this guy over here figured out how to find them with all kinds of with the high tech stuff. So that's who I holler at when I need to really know them on a property. But if you were just out walking on your land and you see these undulations in the land, if you follow, how can I put this? You kind of find the edge, and your contour line is what is level across a slope.
So no elevation up or down as you walk across.
Yes.
So like if you're thinking hill, or let's say literally a cone shape, it'd be a line that you could draw all the way around and it would reconnect with itself.
Exactly.
Correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there's using things like laser levels or A-frame levels. Just knowing the terminology, people can go and look up videos on how to do that.
Yeah.
And as Kerry said, I'm playing a little bit here, but playing dumb a little bit, but I did do a whole video series on how to find contours, various ways, from super high tech on your computer to out in the field with low tech A-frames. So
yeah, and I've referred to that video, and I send that video to people I'm working with because I'm like, Ryan explains it better than I do. So because it's important, because that is a big part. That contour informs a lot of design decisions, especially getting into broader projects where if you're planting many dozens, hundreds of trees, you need to know that.
Yep. And contour is really important in general on your property, understanding it, because once you understand what contour is, then you can understand that water always flows at exactly 90 degrees, meaning it makes a T against the contour because the contour is exactly level and water flows the most downhill path.
Yep.
And so you can start to understand with those contour lines, like a topo map, how water is going to flow across your property.
Yeah. And if you're putting trees in, there's pretty good chance if you're doing it in a large field, you're probably not hooking it up to any kind of traditional irrigation. It could be expensive to do so, depending on what kind of distances you need to cover. So if you're planting on contour, you are already passively fetching that water that's already going to be moving down that way.
Yep. Do you ever use things like micro swales, mini swales, things like that to then plant on for the Silvopasture system?
Yeah, I have pretty much any time, because 99% of my property is on some kind of slope. Most of it relatively gentle. Some areas are a little steeper, but yeah, a lot of the time, if I'm planting in a little, like a little bare root tree, I dig out, like I dig a little shallow catchment basin to just direct, even just a foot width, 18 widths worth of water catch is going to be coming down that hill, and direct it into that little bowl. And yes, and I will also make a little micro mound of soil on the downhill side, just to give it that extra bit of catchment and retention.
Yeah. Something I've found that works really well is if you ever have a mini X out on your property, that front blade is perfect. So if you mark out the contour and you just go to the top, you don't even have to be real careful about it. You put that blade down and you scrape downhill, just, a couple of feet, however big you want it. And then you back up, you go over, you start at the same spot. And I've done a couple 100 feet of swales, mini swales, in it's like 20-30 minutes.
Yeah.
It's ridiculously easy.
Yeah. I've got my fodder tree plot planted into a mini swale. I have mini swales on the top and the bottom of my kitchen garden and at the top and bottom of my food forest. It's just one of those strategies that, man, it pays off.
Mhm.
The effort you put in really, really pays off to have those.
Yeah, and one of the things if people go online and try to look up swales, one of the things that bothers me is people are always talking about they're making these deep, giant scars in their landscape rather than something that's small, simple, and just helps mitigate or bring that water across the whole landscape.
Yeah. They
So
don't have to be be
no,
They really don't to be effective.
Well, because you're just slowing down the water.
Yep.
It doesn't take that much to slow it down.
Yep. Yeah. And my thing is, in a lot of cases, you can go ahead and make a micro swale, and maybe you don't plant into it right away, but you go ahead and you make it. Maybe you've just got the equipment on hand, so you just
Mhm.
knock it out. And maybe, you see a couple of good rainfalls and you think maybe this thing needs to be a little bit wider and a little bit deeper. So, I'm real big on that. What's one of our principles? Small, slow solutions.
Yes.
I love those. Because big, fast, expensive decisions can become big, fast, expensive boo-boos. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, and when you scar and you interrupt the ecological systems with putting giant foxholes on your property, and now you can't get your tractor across. So what do you do now?
Yeah.
It's or I don't know, your cows keep falling in and getting stuck in the mud or whatever because you tried to overdo it. And I see that
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think sometimes people, while we're on the swale topic, people maybe, they get so caught up in the fun of actually moving the earth and doing all that. And so they think, well, I needed this really, really big berm, which means I need a really, deep ditch or channel to get that material. But if you are putting some roots, trees, whatever, into that berm, you don't need a huge berm because those roots they're gonna, do a lot of that work. So, yeah, play around with the small stuff first, make little micro systems, hang out with them for a year or so, see how it does.
Go out there when it rains, right?
Go out there and get out there, get wet, watch what the water's doing. And I think we're going to have an opportunity to do that again here in a few days. I think we're supposed to get some of this, lots of rain in a short period of time. And yeah, just think about little ways you can just capture that. And that I know we're here to talk trees. One of the points I wanted to make about additional functions of these trees, regardless of what kind of tree you're planting, this is an energy harvesting system, just like swales and berms are. Those trees are slowing down that water. They're, of course, photosynthesis. They're taking care of that job. They're providing habitat. They're providing food. Somewhere I'd have to pull it up on my computer, but there's a beautiful hand-drawn graphic that I found online one time, and it was a drawing of an oak tree, and all throughout it had dozens of uses that tree provides. Just, more, way more than I could just think of offhand. So yeah, if you think of trees as this really beneficial tool and resource in your landscape, and not a lot of some conventional I want to say old school, but maybe conventional grazers, they see trees as like a nuisance. And I would encourage people to, alter their perception on that.
Yeah, it's all a matter of it depends. It's how you use it.
Yeah.
And I think to that point, not only do you have to have enough trees, but you also have to have, rotational grazing is really important to make this system work right. Could you talk on that a little bit?
Yeah. So, regardless of what kind of animals you're running, the soil in general, the land in general, the grasses, the forbs, the trees, they need impact, and then they need rest and recovery time. And rest and recovery are not exactly the same thing. We kind of use them interchangeably. Rest is they're not getting impacted by grazing, by hooves, by any of that. But recovery is when you look at the land and you say, I can put the animals back on it now. So that can mean, in terms of grasses, the entire grass tip has grown out again. It's not still blunted. sometimes you can go by, has the manure become incorporated into the soil? Or does it look pretty much the way it did when it came out of the back end of the animal? So, yeah, these two things definitely work together. The trees that are, planted into pasture, generally speaking, you're kind of assuming it's a grass dominated system that you're starting out with, and then you park a tree in there, which is that tree, those tree roots are looking for a fungal dominant soil. Grass and weed dominant soil is probably going to be more bacterial dominant. So you need to give those trees time, or provide them with compost, provide them with what they need, wood chips, whatever the case may be, to to adapt and get well established in that soil. And like some of the places I've started planting trees is in some of the worst soil that we've got, very thin topsoil, a lot of slope. And so, those trees, they get a little more TLC, and the animal impact is very, very minimal. So I can give them a chance to get established.
So in these systems, we're talking, you got to rotate the animals so that it actually works properly. And kind of focusing back in on trees, one of the things I like to think of with trees is, I guess I think of them as being a solar powered water mitigation system.
Yeah.
Right. Because we've got these trees where the grasses are going to get not enough water in the drought. The trees have these deep roots. They can reach down and grab water that the grasses can't get to, pull that up. You've got evapotranspiration. So that's going to keep higher humidity levels, bring water up from down low, and it'll push it back out in the roots and store it in those. So, but then when you get too much water, those roots can suck it up, evaporate it out, or move it wherever it needs to go. And they're just an incredible like water pumping system.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think people miss that, how that can mitigate your need for, say, watering, or increase your production, because they're not only moderating sunlight to some extent where we might be getting too much in the hot periods of summer. They're also helping mitigate the evaporation from the soil, bringing, moderating the moisture levels of the soil, increasing more growth over more periods of the year.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. All those things work together. I mean, if you think about how you feel when you're out setting up fence or whatever in August, and you're looking around for a shade tree, and you immediately notice the difference that you feel when you get underneath that tree, imagine how the grass feels, when it's able to take part in that entire water cycle that tree is part of.
Yeah.
So yeah, tremendous tool.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just looking at my list. I had some questions to ask. So I'm running out of them, not because there's not things to ask, but
so I had a question. So I've got, I don't know, about 5 acres or so of field. So what kind of spacing between trees would be beneficial and I hesitate to say optimal, because there's obviously caveats and exceptions and whatever, but what kind of spacing between trees should I look for?
So if you're going to go with some kind of maybe a nut producing deciduous tree, I would probably go for about 20 feet at minimum. You can plant them closer. You can plant other species in between. So maybe something like a hybrid willow is going to be more wispy and narrow, and not, still going to do its job as a tree, but there's going to be a lot of sunlight that still gets down to the soil surface, to the grass surface. 20 feet's a good one. But really you can play around with it. It's there's not a ton of rules about that right now.
What are ways to function stack within this? What are other things that we can add to this system as we think about how to use this space for more things?
I'm going to consult my notes on this real quick, because I know I had a good one. So a combined fruit and nut tree system would be one. That's one I'm working on personally with some oaks and some mulberry. So, the mulberries everything was planted at the same time. They're all like 1-year-old trees. The mulberries are going to grow faster. They're going to get up there first. They're going to, be doing their job. All the things we just described. They're going to produce some fruit that I can collect and enjoy. I can feed it to the birds or whatever. So while those trees are taking off and the oaks are a little bit slower, but they're going to very much outlast and outlive the mulberries. In the meantime, I can run my sheep under them. I could also run, if I was doing like moving laying hens in some kind of protected system, I could run them under it. And as the oaks become more established, you've got the option of like coppicing the mulberries down, and maybe now you're collecting mulberry leaf. You're not so much worried about fruit, but you're collecting mulberry leaf. So then we can do perhaps rabbit tractors, or maybe there's maybe you could get some meat chickens to enjoy mulberry leaf. And as the nut trees are doing their thing, of course, we're talking about a pretty long timeline here, but pastured pigs under there is an option. Again, all this is rotational. This is not static system. It's not everything all at one time.
Well, like nut finished pigs are some of the most expensive pork you can get.
Yeah. You could do this with if we want something that you're going to get a little faster fruiting that would be beneficial for those of us who enjoy pork. Certain kinds of persimmons, different hybrids of persimmons that are they're kind of like a small tree / large shrub. And those are easily propagated from cuttings and they grow rather fast. So you could get very creative with that.
Well, I imagine like running honeybees in that kind of environment would be great. Having the diversity and having all of that as their fodder, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah. If you have an edge that's kind of quiet enough for the bees, sure. Like they could be in an edge, and then maybe your fencing's in a little bit, so your protection donkey's not knocking over beehives or things like that. But yeah, exactly. Like the more you think about it, you can really start generating these ideas.
Yeah, and I like the idea of having various trees that drop at different times. So your mulberries are going to be fairly early in the season.
Mm-hmm.
And then you might get, your nuts or other certain fruits that would drop kind of mid-season.
Mm-hmm.
And then your persimmons are going to be late season for the most part. Some of them aren't, but a lot of them are. And so you have this higher sugar content, especially when you're trying to fatten things off.
Yep.
Throughout most of the year, but then you can plan it so that you have these drops the different times you're running animals through. I think that's a great way of stacking it. And then you mentioned having things like laying hens or broilers or pigs, or maybe you have you've got a large ruminant like cattle, and then it's hair, sheep, and goats to clean up all the browse that the cattle leave. It seems like there's a lot of ways you can just keep stacking more and more food and production into this system. I was talking with Nick Ferguson about this a while ago, and I think we both landed on the fact that Silvopasture, if done right and if stacked properly, is likely the most productive system you can possibly create with the least amount of input over time.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And you're, back to, observing nature, we're just kind of replicating what naturally happens out there. And we can use our big human brains to put a few tools to work, like electric fencing, a little bit of solar power in one form or another, and just that ability to arrange and design and observe and adjust and be willing to learn from the system and not insist that the system does something that it's not able to do.
Right.
You could have, I think it's one of the most fun and enriching things that I do is figure this kind of stuff out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a big thing too. Not pushing, not demanding the system do something that it shouldn't.
Yeah.
An example would be if you've got a place that has really thin soils, you probably shouldn't be doing swales because you can't dig down or you're going to be exposing rock, right?
Yeah.
But if you've got a lot of rock, you could do something like a stone line.
Mm-hmm.
And so just changing your approach to do a similar thing or accomplish what you need to, but reading, observing the land, how nature would do it, and then implementing that in a way that you can kind of multiply. Our brains are a force multiplier for production.
Mm-hmm.
And just like fuel is a force multiplier for being able to lift something or move something, we can use our brains to increase that production and stack things together in ways that nature does it, just not quite as carefully.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my goals with my own sheep flock is, after July of this year, I'm kind of under like a term and agreement with this flock share program that I'm in. So after July, the sheep that will be remaining on my farm will be fully mine, and then I can decide at that point, like, because right now I kind of graze them over as much property as I can possibly get them on. So I need to grow the numbers so that I have, when I keep my half, that I have a decent number of sheep to do the work that I am accustomed to them doing on this farm now. But once I have those numbers and I kind of have a good idea of what a reasonable size flock is for our land, more of these trees are going to go in so I can better execute on this exact function stack thing that we're kind of talking about. I don't know that I want to add many other types of animals right now. We'll see on that. But even just the sheep and the the ability to move laying hens, and I can tractor my rabbits, those 3 animals alone it's going to be very productive. It's going to continue to build that soil, especially in areas where it's been very thin, because we're just sitting on top of chert and limestone up there. And just the I was noticing positive impact just with the sheep alone, just moving the sheep around, not even doing much beyond that at the time, just moving them around. That impact alone was just so incredible. I was really hooked at that point, especially because they were doing most of the work. I was putting, fence posts in and reeling out line, and otherwise they were doing the rest of it.
That's awesome. Can you tell me, I have this, really fanciful idea of setting up silvopasture with trees you can plant from seed.
Mm-hmm.
So I really like the idea of planting from seed. You get better root structure. It's free, generally speaking.
They're already adapted.
Yeah, they're adapted. Can you speak to like where that's a good idea, where it's a bad idea, maybe some of the trees that you could do that with, and pros and cons to that?
I mean, if you think like a squirrel, any of your nut trees are designed for that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to be grazing the area at the same time, I would say, if you're just putting nuts in the ground, and that you've got, 8 months to a year before that little nut even germinates and puts up a shoot, and you're running animals across it, especially ruminants, I wouldn't, other than like perhaps marking them somehow in a way that the animals aren't going to mess up, in that first year, just put those things in the ground, throw a little compost on it, call it good, run the animals, let them add that fertility. Assuming they don't want to dig, like sometimes my sheep will paw at the ground and I'll find like bare places on the ground, and I'm like, I don't know why they do that, but I just end up throwing hay on those spots when they do it. But yeah, make sure they're not going to damage. But within a year or two, start looking at what kind of germination you're getting. Get you some tree tubes, but at that point, you're probably going to need to have some kind of protection system, unless you can plant them in such a way that they're kind of adjacent to a pasture, so you can easily fence your animals out and then, move them in when they're like this one row. I'm thinking of this one row that I've put in. It's not very many. It's about 6 or 8 trees, and it's in a kind of a long, like narrow but long field, and it's actually where I have the sheep right now. And I just push the sheep a little further down the hill, and they're just not in with those trees right now. And so I just kind of have this wider lane up closer to the top of the hill, because I'm reworking the kind of protection system that I decided to do for those. And I kind of needed to move the sheep. So I said, I'm just gonna fence them out of them altogether.
Yeah.
So if that's possible, and it really depends on how your animals are trained. If you're talking about ruminants, how they're trained to fence. I'm lucky. Mine are very well trained. They know that white wire bites really hard. So in a pinch, I can set like three step-in posts around a tree. Say I've got, like a 2 foot tall sapling, and I will just take that wire and I'll just go around the post, and then I'll run it over and I'll do the same thing. And it may or may not even be electrified, because especially if it's just sort of like out in the middle of the pasture, it kind of cuts them off. And if they want to get to the upper part, they have to go all the way around. So a lot of times it'll just be a dead fence line, but they don't know that. But you can't always get away for that for very long. So you kind of have to, that's one of those, you have to really know your animals. Some people will do these cages, and these are relatively inexpensive. They're a few dollars a piece. They're pretty gnarly to deal with, though. They're basically like these, like if you think of, if a honey locust was a metal cage, this is what these things look like. They come to you, they're not flat, but they're kind of, gently curved, and you have to, it's basically welded wire fencing with sections cut and pieces poking out. And so we're like, wear really good gloves when you're messing with these. These are no joke. But when Miller was telling me that like the cows will not mess with those, and the cows want to rub on everything, and the cows do not want to, and they have big, forget what kind of cattle they have out there, but big robust cattle. So I would say be figuring out how you want to protect them in that first year that they're going from a nut to a little sprout.
Yeah. You got my brain going on how to make these, how to make a better, cheaper tree protector.
Please do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, one of the things I'm thinking of is, the 2x4 welded wire that you can get really cheap, and you can take an angle grinder, basically just, you can cut strips really quick and fold it around.
Yeah.
Well, what if you put that on one of those insulated posts? So, the insulated posts that have like little clips that you're supposed to put the wire in.
Yep.
You just stick it in one of those, and you make it, maybe that big to go around the tree.
Yeah.
Stick it over the tree, put it on the insulated post. When you're running your sheep, you leave it there. And when you're running the sheep, you just daisy chain some wire to it or something like that. But
yeah. Electrification seems to be the most reliable and successful way of going about this. But I have some cut off sections of welded wire fencing, and I may try that. My problem, like my donkey Primrose will rub on everything. And if the scratchier it looks to her, and so she'll just push the whole thing over. But if it's electrified, and then of course, if she doesn't see that wire, if there's no wire there, no actual poly wire, she's going to get popped, and then she's going to be mad at me because she's like, I'm not supposed to get popped by something that's not white wire. So I might need to put that white wire on it just to signal her. But
there you go.
Yeah. So the damage can be, sometimes it's rubbing, sometimes it's, girdling, where they'll just strip the bark off. A lot of times they'll take a big bite off the top. As your trees grow and they come out of the top of that tube, because these tubes are really tall. I think they're about 7 feet tall. So you can put it over a little itty bitty sapling, and you've got a miniature greenhouse growing that tree for, 2 or 3 years. But usually once the tree is relatively tall, a little bite off the top is not going to, it's not going to affect it too negatively. But yeah, do put that creative brain of yours to work, because we're all still trying to find the most reliable, affordable way to really protect these trees, especially when you're talking about projects where we're putting in, dozens or hundreds of trees.
Yeah. I'm going to think on that.
Go for it.
So what are some other trees we could plant by seed? I mean, we've got, hickory, oak, walnut, maybe American persimmon, if you want to go that route.
Yeah, the persimmon does pretty well. I find a lot of persimmon saplings, and those appear to just be planted by the coyotes taking a poop. So those do really well, and they grow fast.
I've thought of Antonovka apples. but I don't think they do great in like zone 7 is their last zone.
Okay.
And personally, when I plant plants, I want to have one zone of buffer on either side.
Yeah.
So I'd want to plant an apple that goes to zone 8.
Yeah. Another one that's really cool that a lot of people don't think about, but it's one of our native trees here in Tennessee, is the catalpa. And they are beautiful trees. They are huge. They will get huge. And it's so it makes kind of like a pod that looks a lot like a milkweed pod. And so it has these little kind of slim, feathery type seeds. And so, of course, you have tons of seeds in one pod. And my catalpa tree that I got from Andy Eddings, you probably know Andy.
Yeah.
He gave that tree to me 4 or 5 years ago now. And it's going to be the canopy tree for my food forest. It's well on its way. And he started those from seeds in pots.
Cool. I've got some cherry trees from his grandfather's or great grandfather's tree. So yeah, I know Andy. He's a good guy. Have you ever messed with Kentucky coffee tree?
I haven't, but that's one that's definitely on the list alongside Yapon holly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Yapon holly I'm interested in just because it's got caffeine, right?
Yes, and since
Don't
we
feed
are
it to your buddies.
we are preppers, which means we might need to be growing our own caffeine if we partake.
Yeah.
So that Kentucky coffee tree, that one's really interesting. And like I'm not finding it at any of the local nurseries. Like I'm sure we could order it online, but that's one that seems to not really be all that popular, but I like to have it.
It's a nitrogen fixer as far as I understand.
Mm-hmm.
Not that you can use it for coffee, like real coffee, it doesn't have caffeine, but you combine that with Yapon holly and because it tastes just like coffee when you roast the beans.
Yeah.
So, for prepping, but apparently the beans aren't as toxic or aren't toxic. So maybe your animals could eat them as well, whereas some of the other bean pods are. So.
Yeah. Another one from seed that came to mind, black locust. So black locust does have thorns, but it's not like the honey locust that has those mega thorns that come off the main trunk. They do have thorns. They're real thorny when they're small, and the bigger they get, they lose most of the thorns. And I can attest to this personally because I have hundreds of them on my property. One of the trees that my great grandfather planted originally, because they are so rot resistant, make excellent posts. We have posts in the ground that are, that were put in the 40s that are still completely intact. But another nitrogen fixer, coppices really well. Like I said, once it's bigger, you're not really dealing with thorns. The sheep love it.
Mm-hmm.
I've got several places where they were like super, super brushy. We cleaned it out, kind of got bush hogged a couple of times. And what came back was just, locust everywhere. They root sucker off their root system quite prolifically so that they can become a problem tree if you don't manage them well. But once I discovered how much the sheep love the leaves, I just considered a fodder tree that's just hanging out in kind of less than ideal areas of the property. And so, they set seed pods, long seed pods, germinate really easily. And in addition, if you get to them when they're flowering, which is a very short window, that's one of the tastiest flowers that you will ever eat.
Well, isn't that one that makes some of the most delicious honey?
Yes.
Is when the bees feed on that?
It's such a short window that sometimes those flowers will only be available for a week or so because they're so fragile. They kind of look like the bloom of like a sugar snap pea, and they taste pretty similar. If we get even just the slightest windy day, it tends to knock the flowers off. So so people who are beekeepers, I'm sure they love to have locusts around.
Yeah, and I think something we're going to miss due to time constraints, but I'd love to have you back on for is you're a bit of an expert on the, identifying plants and then understanding, what they're used for and what you can do with them. So, and that's just another good example of that. So I'd love to have you back on.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Let's do it sometime.
That'd be great. Yeah, I'm trying to think of, there was one other plant, because that's kind of your specialty, that I wanted to ask you about, not even necessarily for silvopasture, but in general for a nitrogen fixer in orchards and things, and that's the mimosa tree. I know there's medicinal benefits to it. I know some people consider it pretty invasive, but what are your thoughts on using that as a nitrogen fixer and for medicinal type stuff?
Yeah, this is one of those things that can kind of get you in hot water depending on where you land within the invasive non-native species and all that. Mimosa can be, it's not the most invasive thing. It is not like the honeysuckles and the privet and calorie pear and things like that, where they can just absolutely dominate a landscape. They do coppice really well, because I've been doing this. I don't really have any. I've got like one on my property, but a customer's property that I've been working at regularly for a couple of years now. She has a few at the edge of a wood line, and so I've just been keeping them coppice back, because they're kind of situated in a place where the nitrogen fixing capabilities are very beneficial to the food forest that is at this portion of the property. Yes, the flowers can be used. They have a very like calming sedative effect. They can be captured for that. They are beneficial to the bees. They provide a lot of food for them. And I'm not like in my invasive bad boy playbook. They're not way up on the list. So, and probably they're already, wherever you may be planting them, they're already probably around.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know that you're really making things quote unquote worse. Because I'm not like strictly native only. Like there's a lot of benefit to dealing with the most what we call noxious invasives, really dealing with those for the benefit of having some of our native stuff be able to gain a foothold again. If it's going into a system that is going to be managed, like I would not personally have any issue with it. And the thing is that they work.
Mm-hmm.
They work when you're dealing. A lot of times when we're putting in these systems, the soil has been disturbed or mismanaged or even abused. And so we might need to throw a lot of tools at it to get that activity, healthy again. And, to my I don't think mimosa is any issue. I don't think it's got any issues with making ruminants sick. I don't think it's unsafe for them. So
cool.
Yeah.
Well, my use case is I have on one of my on a friend's property, I was able to procure like 40 trees of varieties that I wanted at like $3 a tree.
Nice.
But as a one-time deal. And so I needed to put those trees in so they didn't all die. So I left spaces for nitrogen fixers, and it's a shoestring property. And it was, especially when we started it. And so I need some nitrogen fixers to put in those spots that I left. And I kind of was thinking, well, mimosa, it's pretty, like you said, it coppice as well. So I can use it for chop and drop, cut the tree just all the way down every couple of years, and low maintenance nitrogen fixing. It just seems like a great overall tree for the purpose.
Yeah. And like I said, there's a very good chance it's already around.
Mm-hmm.
Mimosa does not seem like it takes up such a footprint that it's out competing a bunch of other natives. It seems like it kind of plays nice, which I know means it's not. I mean, it's still considered invasive, but that's my personal observation from 42 years in East Tennessee.
Well, I plant true comfrey, and whenever I say it on a video, I just get like, that's invasive. That's going to take over everything. I'm like, it doesn't.
Yeah. And I also wonder how many of those people are actually out there planting trees and creating systems. So.
Exactly. It's like, I guess if I planted it in my garden, I could create an issue, but the same with regular comfrey, right?
Yeah.
You plant it, you try to take it out, there's 10 roots and 10 more plants grow.
Yeah.
So, but I find comfrey plants periodically here and there on my property or on some of the ones where I've planted this, but it doesn't take over.
Yeah. Yeah. That's not one of the things to be concerned about.
I'm afraid of because I planted some Jerusalem artichoke, and I was afraid it did not take over. It didn't. Like, I was happy when I was like, oh, good, it's growing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's another one that works well with tree systems. Those artichokes,
Mhm.
I've been planting them into woodland edges, just as a biomass source. My rabbits absolutely love those leaves. I just
bet.
bust the whole top of the stalk off. So yeah, that's just one. It's like that's just got way too many uses not to have it in multiple locations on the property.
Well, and with Jerusalem artichokes, they'll take over a small area,
Mhm.
but they essentially start killing themselves off if you don't
Yeah,
pull
so
them out and
dense of an
spread
area.
them.
Yeah,
Exactly.
crowd themselves out for sure.
Yep. So you'll very rarely see them take over an area, like a bigger area. It's a maybe like a 10 by 10 swath, and then they kind of start dying off.
Yeah.
Like maybe if you like tilled it and then just spread those
Mhm.
roots out, and then that I could see it taking over.
Yeah.
Sure. Yep. Yeah, the rhizomes could become a problem. So, Jared, you got any thoughts on other questions or things that we haven't covered with Kerry here?
I've learned lots of really cool things about it. Like I've when you came to our place originally, we talked about like what to do with the hillside and what to do with the field, and this is really along the lines of what I had kind of envisioned was planting trees and running pigs, running some small ruminants and stuff like. So this has been great. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Kerry, so much for being on. And like I said, I think we need to have you back on, just talking more about like wild edibles or other plants that kind of play on your other expertise.
Yeah.
So we'd love to do that.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell people where they can find you, what you do? Just plug your business, because you've got a pretty cool business.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I run Strong Roots Resources. That is an edible landscape design and consulting business. What I like to tell people is I help them understand their landscape, help them understand the natural systems that are already in place, how we can leverage those to produce food. And I don't care if you've got a 1/5 acre urban lot, which is where I originally started, or if you've got 40 acres, principles are the same, just like your all's segments that you've been doing on the permaculture principles. I like to get in there, help people understand what is going on. I mean, yeah, I can tell you what to do, and that's fine, but I'd rather you understand the process and then learn to kind of think through these things yourself. So yeah, and one of the things I've really been getting into is designing and planting these silvopasture systems. I've got a number of these on my books right now. I would like to do more. I love planting trees. It's very very meditative, very rewarding. So yeah, so I design and consult within about a 4-hour travel radius of Knoxville, Tennessee. Our farm, Bluebird Hill, is in West Knox County. It's a family farm, been in the family since the 30s. I raise Katahdin hair sheep out there. That's the primary focus in terms of the animals. We're off grid up there, and I'm putting together my calendar for the year, but I will have classes out there. I generally always do foraging classes. The wild edible foraging classes are always a lot of fun. And so, yeah, everything, all social media, strongrootsresources.com, all that good stuff is how people can get a hold of me if they'd like to chat about their properties and their goals.
Awesome. Yeah, I've been bummed out because you've done the wild edibles walk at several things I've been at, and I've like been stuck behind a booth or something else, or just missed it somehow. And I've been really wanting to do one of those with you. Maybe I have to hire you to come out to the farm and teach a class on that.
Yeah, we could do that sometime for sure.
Cool. Yeah. If people want help with stuff that Kerry does, they should check out his website. Jared, you want to kind of tell people what you do?
Oh, sure. All right. Here we go. I can be all fancy. All right. So I'm Jared Wilson. I own Resilient Living. So we sell disaster preparedness equipment. We sell all kinds of resources. So books, clothes, freeze-dried foods, knives. I'm getting my firearms license. I promise it will happen eventually. I swear the ATF just hates me. I've got a small shop right on Highway 111 between Sparta and Spencer. So if you're anywhere in the Middle Tennessee area, swing by the shop. Otherwise, you can find us at resilientliving.com. You can follow us on social media. Same thing, Resilient Living, live in, not living, because somebody else stole that one. So that's me.
Cool. Well, my name is Ryan Steva, and I have the homesteadconsultant.com, which is a little bit on the nose, but it was available, so I've got it. And you're probably watching this on my YouTube channel, most likely, if you're watching it. So I've got a bunch of other videos and things that you can look into, because I really like helping people figure out how to do things and how to become, well, more resilient, like this podcast is all about. I also help people with consults in the general Middle Tennessee area. My expertise is really kind of in technical things, figuring out technical solutions for things that other people might not be capable of doing or understanding. So if you need help with things like that or a consult, you can find all my information at thehomesteadconsultant.com. So thank you, everybody, for being here and for watching. And we will see you in the next one, Tuesday at 7, right, Jared?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thanks, everyone.